Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a nice, restful lunch and that you are now ready to continue this group reflection. So, as Anthony just said, I am a Taekwondo teacher. I'm also a PhD in philosophy, and that's why Anthony brought me here. And by the way, I'm very thankful to Anthony and other organizers of this event for inviting me here. As a philosopher and a Taekwondo master, it's very interesting for me to finally gather these two aspects of my life together and have the opportunity to discuss with people. Because when I'm doing philosophy, I'm in my office at the university and I'm only doing philosophy, I'm only thinking. And when I'm doing Taekwondo, I'm only doing Taekwondo. Of course, I talk with my students, I discuss with them, but most of them are teenagers and they are not academics or trained in philosophy, so I know that they understand a part of what I say, but not everything. And so I'm happy to have this opportunity today to share and to receive your comments. So there will be a Q&A session after the presentation if we have the time. The reason why I believe it is interesting to bring philosophy into the dojang, as I named my presentation, is that, so what is philosophy? I won't bring an answer to this question today, but a first characterization of philosophy could be its process of deconstructing appearances. By appearances, I mean what is obvious, what seems very obvious to us, so obvious that we don't think about it. I don't think about every step when I walk. I just walk since I am, I don't know, 3 or 4, I don't know when we are supposed to learn how to walk. But I walk every day. That's something very obvious. I never think about it. And thinking philosophically about walking would be precisely to stop walking and to reflect on the process. And that's why I intend to do here by bringing philosophy into the dojang and sharing with you some consideration about the value of values. So this presentation will have 3 parts. In the first part, I will introduce an operative definition of values. By operative, I mean that it's a definition which will be useful in the context of this presentation. In the context of a philosophical reflection on values, I do not pretend that this is the definition, the only definition of value. Is just one definition which I believe is useful, can be useful here. In the second part, I will address the question of evaluation and valorization, and the question to know why do values matter. That's maybe the trickiest part of this presentation, because it's not only philosophy related. It's something that we enact every day in our teaching, in our training. So here we will maybe step out of the philosophical sphere for a moment. And then, in a third part, I will address the question of grounding values. What do value depend on? And probably this question will appear clear to you in the process of the presentation. And for that, I will present 2 philosophical options which have been chosen, which I chose not arbitrarily, but maybe just because I like the 2 philosophers we will discuss. There would have been plenty other options, and these 2 are only, as I said, options. So without further ado, let's dig in and let's address the definition of value. So this is the operative definition I mentioned in the introduction. So values can be defined as manifestations of what matters, what is important, valuable, and therefore desirable in a given community, group, or context. We will go into the element of this definition in a moment. Let's just add a couple elements, a couple of things more to begin with. So values can be expressed in comments, in order, if you prefer, so that they make what matters explicit, more or less explicit. For instance, if I am told to respect my parents, this is an order, this is an injunction, a command, and it compels me to be respectful toward my parents, because respect matters, and my parents as particular individual in my life matters somehow as well. If I say be thankful for what is given or help your neighbor, these are other injunctions, comment which in my opinion express values. And so these values, they provide a means and criteria to evaluate, to judge actions and behavior. For instance, if I circle back to one of the examples I just gave, the one who helps his neighbors is a good neighbor because he abides by the value of helping, or the command of helping a neighbor, because a helpful behavior is valuable. So I can say about such kind of people that he or she is a good person. All right? Maybe it will become a bit clearer and we can discuss these later. So now let's have a look. I hope it's clear for everybody. If you have trouble reading what is written on the slide, because there is a lot of content, I apologize for that. Don't hesitate to raise your hand and I can read it out loud, or spend a little bit more time on one or the other slide. So let's have a look at the element of the definition I suggested. So values are manifestation. That is to say that they reflect, they express something which is seen as valuable. And they make what they manifest more or less explicit. I've already said that earlier. Secondly, they manifest what matters. What matters is, in my opinion, that by which values are valuable. It is because anything is thought to be important, that it makes what manifests it valuable kind of in return. We'll have example of that later. So they express and manifest what matters, and because it matters, it is perceived as desirable. And this is because maybe the most difficult or the trickiest aspect of values is that there is some kind of a jump from what is wanted to the opinion that because I want this, or us as a community, we want this, so this should be something that should be wanted. So we go from something in fact, I in fact ask respect from my student, as my student has respect from me. All right? I ask them for this. I believe it is something valuable, so this is something which should be wanted, for instance, for everybody in a dojang. So here is the gap between something in fact and something in right. So from de facto to de jure perspective. This might be, I believe, one of the most complicated part of the concept of value, so I won't spend too much time on that, and I won't be addressing that a lot in my presentation. And finally, last element, this might be the most obvious part. Values express what matters in a given community, group, or context. That is to say that different groups may have different values, and that value may not be equally valuable depending on the context. That is to say that values do not always matter in the same way. So we addressed the question of the universal feature of value in the introduction of today. I believe it's highly important to reflect on the universality of one or maybe our set of values, but it is also what makes it highly complicated, because as a matter of fact, again, values do not matter in the same way for everybody and in every places. All right? So to go a little bit further, I would like to spend some time to discuss Taekwondo's core values. So in the previous presentation, there were 5. In my dojang, there are 8. All right? So that might be an example that values do not always matter the same way, because they are not always the same for everybody, and we can express them differently. And I was thinking during your presentation that maybe some of the value you presented can be equivalent to some of these, or that what you express in one value can be duplicated in two of them. So as you can see, there is no fixed system of value, I believe. So let's camp on these for a little while and see what they say about the concept of value. First of all, I consider these words as straightforward formulations of the martial arts value. All right, so here we say it's Taekwondo's 8 comments, and I believe these comments actually communicate value. So through them, one can approximate the idea of what it is to be a good Taekwondoist. As comments, they are injunctions to act or to behave in a certain way. And for instance, as black belt and teacher, we would say, or we would expect our students to show motivation in training, to present themselves with a clean dobok, for instance, to bow to the master as the rite that begins and ends every classes, not to be late as a show of good manners, but also an important token of respect. You don't arrive late somewhere where the activity begins. For instance, today nobody was late, so we are all very respectful and full of good manners. So don't be late, be fair with your training partner or opponent, etc. So this is not a closed list. The list could go on and on and on. So one more thing, that such behavior, when they are enacted by a student, a teacher, or anybody involved in Taekwondo, these behaviors attest that the person, this individual, adheres to what is important when practicing Taekwondo. So we can see here some kind of a complex of conceptual relationships between the different elements of the concept of value. So as I began to stress, each of these comments can mean many different things, and one's understanding of them may vary and sometimes considerably. And let's take an example. For instance, I said that patience is one of Taekwondo's core value, but what does it mean? What does it mean to be patient? Is it to be able to wait for a long time? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if it's the best way to show that you adhere to Taekwondo's value, just to be waiting there. But if someone doesn't wait or is impatient, precisely we say, you are impatient, please show some patience. Wait for a while. We still have to wait 5 minutes, be patient. Or is to be patient to spend time to repeat motion again and again to improve them. It's also a token of patience, just to do the same thing or the same things over and over again, aiming for some improvement. But in that case, how is it different from sacrifice, for instance? We can formulate that in another way and say, I'm sacrificing a lot of time practicing my aremaki or my apchagi to improve it. All right? And again, maybe a more telling example, what does it mean to show respect? Am I respectful in the same way when I listen to my master and apply their instruction? And is it the same thing to respect a training program, a diet, for instance? Is the respect that one shows to his or her opponent in competition the same thing that the respect a student has for his or her dojang? I'm not convinced that this is exactly the same thing, but we would say that this student is respectful in each situation. So we see that values can be enacted, put it into practice in many ways, and that many different behavior may be regarded as relying or expressing a certain set of value. However, and this is where the philosophy kind of Socratic move happens, none of these behavior taken separately can be is enough to completely express this set of values. And again, one value, if I say, let's say, modesty, by saying this word, I have not exhausted all the possible behaviors and action that shows that I'm being modest, for instance. So what I believe is that, what I believe is that to reflect on values and to reflect philosophically on values, to have a constructive philosophical reflection on value, we should take a step back from examples. Because examples, we could multiply them again and again and formulate plenty of them, and we will have plenty examples of what it is to be modest, what it is to be respectful, what it is to be patient. But in doing that, we would not get closer to why these value matters. What is it? What does it mean to be valuable in this situation? All right. So one more aspect, important aspect of values, we can surmise through philosophical analysis, is that they, as manifestation of what matters, they provide some kind of a scale to assess, to evaluate many different action, behavior, and enterprises, or speeches, or whatever. As I have said, if I say modesty, there is many ways to be modest. But if I take modesty as a value, I can, as I said, say he's being modest that way, that is a good behavior. He's doing that, and by doing that, he is very modest, that is good, a good action. So we have values as a tool for evaluation, and evaluation of many different things which may appear unrelated at the first glance. All right? So by evaluating action and behaviors in regard to a certain scale or a certain set of values, these action and behaviors are themselves made valuable. That is to say, they are pointed as worth doing or not, if they are not valuable. I have another instance here, but I believe we all understand what I mean. The important point here is that there is some kind of a process. So values point at something which matters, something which is valuable. And by assessing different behaviors through values, I transfer the valuable features to this behavior, which itself becomes valuable. All right? So a modest behavior, such as in my example, to take advice from higher grade students in Pumse, even though I'm a big Pumse championship and they are not, I won gold medals and they did not, but they are higher. They are higher than I am in the grade scale of Taekwondo, so I keep taking advice from them. I'm being both modest and respectful. So this behavior, this kind of behavior, can be said to be valuable in regard to those value in itself. So let's call this process valorization. So the valorization is the process by which various action and behavior are assessed in regard to a certain scale of value and thus made valuable on this shared scale. And I believe that we can picture this process like this. So from values, it may be expressed in comments. We can go to actions and behavior and assess them as themselves valuable, and then the circle starts all over again. So let's have a brief recap of what we have seen so far. Because such actions are seen as consistent in regard with or to a given set of values, these actions are themselves said to be valuable and worth doing. That's the process of valorization, as I named it, and it will be important for the rest of the presentation. That's why I focus on that a lot. Because values can serve to evaluate and judge actions and behavior, they can be regarded as what guides them. So values here become guidelines for our behaviors in order to aim for some goodness that values bring with them. All right? So action and behavior which are guided by value are seen as good because values are themselves seen as good. So, for instance, respect is seen as a good thing, therefore a respectful behavior is seen as good. And on the contrary, because if there is this process of evaluation toward the good, there is this opposite of evaluate what is not worthy, a disrespectful behavior will be regarded as bad or unworthy. All right, so let's go one step further now. Why is that so? That values or a certain set of values are said to be good. Where do values, goodness, and value come from? All right, so if we look at this valorization process, we see that there is still some, where is the pointer here? Some question mark here. So if the values are that by which our actions and behavior are assessed as themselves valuable, why is that so that values are valuable? Where does that come from? Are they totally arbitrary? Is that arbitrary that I stress the importance of respect, cleanliness, modesty, manner, spirit, sacrifice in the context of Taekwondo training? It might seem arbitrary, but we discussed the question of the universality of values. So something universal cannot be arbitrary. It seems counterintuitive. All right, so let's address now this question mark. And that's in this context that I would like to introduce two philosophical options as to ground values value. So the two philosophical options that I chose are Aristotle, this highly important Greek philosopher of the classical period, philosopher who developed a complete moral philosophy, and especially in a treatise which is called the Nicomachean Ethics. So for those who are not familiar with the history of philosophy, Nicomachus was one of Aristotle's sons. So he devoted this treatise to Nicomachus, his son, and this is why it is called the Nicomachean Ethics. So Nicomachean here refers to Nicomachus, which is a proper name, so don't bother too much with that. Just remember the part of the title which says ethics, which is the label for moral philosophy. And Aristotle's moral philosophy, which is sometimes described as an ethics of virtues, plural, is grounded based on the concept of practical wisdom or prudence, prudentia in Latin, phronesis in Greek, and I believe this concept is highly interesting in our discussion or reflection about value. So that will be the first option we will explore in a short moment. The second option, so let's go 2 millennia, 2000 years forward to Nietzsche, German philosopher, known for developing a perspectivist philosophy. Philosopher who developed a critique, a very harsh critique, of Western culture and philosophical tradition, and also an analysis of Western morality taken as a whole, which is seen as an inquiry into morality's genealogy. So you can refer to Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality, that's the title of one of his works. So just a few words to introduce this concept of genealogy. What Nietzsche is interested with is not to look at values in themselves or good and bad in themselves, but to what supports this vision, this vision of good and bad, or this set of value. So Nietzsche does take this step back, or actually deeper into the problem. He do not stop to a certain set of values. He goes further and look at why those values. How is that possible that those values were so important at this moment in time? Maybe we'll have the opportunity to discuss a little bit more the concept of genealogy later, because I think as Aristotle's concept of phronesis is, Nietzsche's genealogical inquiry might be highly interesting for our modern reading of the concept of value. So let's dig in Aristotle now. I have said that phronesis is the core concept of Aristotle's moral philosophy. It is translated, I have said, like as practical wisdom or prudence. I will prefer the second one, which seems a little bit less loaded and more appealing to common sense. So phronesis is defined as an acquired habit in conjunction with a truthful reasoning concerned with acting in the realm of what is good or bad for human. And I underscored the important aspect of this definition. I believe one of the two most important actually are acquired habit and truthful reasoning. Why is that so? Because for Aristotle, nobody is virtuous, or there is no good person from the start. To be a good person, to act virtuously, is something that can be acquired. So it's a very optimistic way. Through the proper education, anybody can become a good person. So this is important to train in a virtuous conduct, but this is also important for the wise men, or the phronimoi, as Aristotle named them. So the person who are able to act with prudence, with phronesis. It is important for such kind of person to be a model, be examples for younger people. And Aristotle says that in the Nicomachean Ethics. He says it is very rare to find phronesis in young people because they don't have enough experience to know what it is to resonate in terms of what is good or bad for human. So usually older people are wiser than young people, which seems quite lucid in Aristotle's view. All right? So, and the notion of a truthful reasoning, of course, that is to say that Aristotle's moral philosophy is very intellectual. Aristotle emphasizes the importance of thinking, reasoning, demonstrate, and in the case of ethics it will be more about deliberate than demonstrate, but we have to think before we act or while we act. So there is for Aristotle no good action which can be seen as totally disconnected from some kind of reasoning, and reasoning oriented toward some kind of truth. So if I can sum up, I would say that prudence, phronesis, is what makes us able to decide in each situation about what should be done or what should not be done. In other words, it is the virtue by which we act according to our value. It is through the use of phronesis that we can enact our set of values. A couple of words about what Aristotle means by good or bad for human. The realm of ethics for Aristotle is a subject of deliberation. That is to say that we have to deliberate on our course of action. And why is that so? Because in Aristotle's view, and it is again very realistic view, the realm of human affairs is subject to uncertainty, fickleness, change. And it is possible to call for various means toward the same goal. That is to say that in a given situation, we could never act the same way twice, or at least exactly the same way, simply because the idea of the same situation is biased in Aristotle's view. There is never twice the same situation. And so we have to deliberate and to ponder, to weight the situation in regard to its component and our situation in it. And for instance, in a battle, in the Greek morality, it was seen as a good thing to be brave, to show bravery and courage, and to go to fight in a battle. It's seen as very virtuous conduct. So they have this value of bravery. And on the contrary, it would be seen as weak, to flee and to hide. However, if the enemy is in a position of strength, it would be just merely suicidal to charge the enemy directly and to fight bravery, but without considering the proper situation. Let's imagine that we are an army and we are about to fight, but the enemy is seated on the top, is located on the top of a hill. They have clear view on the field, archer or good snipers, and they will see us coming. So if we just go straight ahead and charge, we'd just be shooted inside, and that would be a stupid course of action, not virtuous at all, because we would die. So Aristotle is not naive. He say, here bravery is the path to the death. And if we could, if you want to construe another example more related to our current situation, let's imagine we have a competitor. We go with this competitor to a championship. The competitor, this person has trained, and he or she is very prepared. And we have this idea that, okay, he's brave to go to the fight and motivated and disciplined, and that's good. And we go, but then, even though maybe the competitor might be a little bit feared to go on the field, he or she might overcome this fear, and that would be a good thing. But we arrived in the situation, in the championship, and we see that the opponent is way stronger, way tougher, more trained, faster, stronger, and that our competitor doesn't stand a chance. What would be the proper conduct as a coach in this kind of situation? Just to throw the towel and to give it a day, to declare forfeit. And it's not giving up, it's not shameful. As a coach, it would be the right thing to do to preserve our competitor for potentially severe injury. So that would be, in Aristotle's view, a virtuous conduct, because it ponders the situation. And a bad conduct would be to over-trust our competitor and just say, no, he or she has trained super well and is super ready, he will go, and to not take into consideration the qualities of the opponent. Right? So even though our competitor might be winning in other competition, the present competition might be different, and we have to ponder it in order to take a good decision. And that's how decision making works in Aristotle's, through deliberation and through pondering the situation. So one more point on Aristotle's view. In his perspective, deliberation, guided by phronesis, by prudence, always aims as reaching the highest among goods. That is to say that for human, the highest among good for Aristotle is happiness. And Aristotle defines happiness as the fact to live a good life. So he argues that as the highest good for human, happiness is the cause of all goods. All things, all virtuous conduct can be said to be good, are good, because they aim at reaching out to the highest good. For instance, if I circle back to the example of the competitor, I stop the fight, I preserve my competitor from severe injury, he stays alive, he stays in a good shape, he's not injured, so he can live to fight another day. Right? So, and even though he's not happy, or he or she is not happy right now because he didn't have a chance to fight, but he can fight later and continue his training without suffering pain or anything bad. So, in the end, there is a higher good to this virtuous conduct, which is happiness. I won't go into Aristotle's definition of happiness, which is highly complicated and grounded in some metaphysical tenets, which would be too long to explain here. What we can remember, though, is that for Aristotle's virtues are grounded from the top, and Aristotle assumes the existence of a good by which all the other goods are good. And so, action and behaviors are thus made valuable in regard to this highest good. So we see that the valorization process takes its roots from the top in the highest good, which is happiness. All right? So let's go now and consider Nietzsche's perspective. So here what we need to know is that in Nietzsche's view, each being, each thing, including human, is defined as a power, as a living force. And so it's a power to live, a power to continue to exist, to stay alive, and to increase its life and its power. So it has sometimes been defined in some texts as a will to power, very controversial concept whatsoever. Because beings are constantly struggling to maintain their existence. This is Nietzsche's view on existence taken as a whole, on the entire realm of existence. And just a quick footnote here, Nietzsche has a very interesting relationship with a particular interest in Darwinism and the theory of evolution. And so to throw a quick picture of evolutionism, you might know that in Darwin's theory, if the animals, let's say, is well adapted to his environment, this animal will survive and pass his genes to the next generation, and that's how evolution works, roughly speaking. In Nietzsche is the same idea. Everything is constantly competing to stay alive and to maintain its life. And so to do that, beings create means to impose their power, their will to other things. And among these are values, and that's here that Nietzsche is interesting for our topic today. Because for him, values reflect what is useful, what counts as good for such and such things, for such and such being. And the key word here is count as, right? If, let's say, it is useful to me to beat one of you in order to stay alive, it is useful to me to beat you, to dominate you physically, to stay alive. It increases my power, so it's not good in itself, but it's useful, so it's my value. Actually, I can promote that as a value. All right? So here is a quick sample from the genealogy of morality. Nietzsche's right, purpose and usefulness are only the clue that a will to power took over something less powerful than itself, and by itself imposed to it a function. This is a convoluted sentence. The whole history of a thing, of an organ, of a custom, is to be seen as an uninterrupted chain of interpretation and of ever-renewed application. So what does Nietzsche say here is that we, as beings, are interpreting reality as this constant battlefield for living forces. We are interpreting it, and from this interpretation, we create values and useful tools in order for us to survive. So values depend on what is advantageous, useful in regard to, and regarded as true by such and such beings regarding their present situation. That is to say that there is no good and bad action as such in Nietzsche's perspective. There are rather successful or unsuccessful attempts at imposing one's will, and I mentioned the notion of genealogy, the genealogical perspective on morality in Nietzsche. That is precisely what he does in this book. He looks what has been successful in Western culture has to create his present time state of what morality is and what values are. So in Nietzsche's view, values can and must be changed and reinvented. There is no eternal, and I would add universal, system of values in Nietzsche's perspective. So Nietzsche is actually the exact mirror opposite of Aristotle's, because for him he stressed how values emerge from the bottom, claiming that beings are intrinsically power and will to maintain their life. Values are the temporary construction, valuable as far as they serve their purpose. All right, so let's have a little pros and cons regarding Aristotle's and Nietzsche's moral philosophy and their usefulness in regard to our problem today. So in Aristotle, I've said that he stresses the importance given to teaching and practices of values. For Aristotle, good actions result from a process of reflection and deliberation. This is the intellectual aspect of Aristotle's moral philosophy. And virtuous conducts are oriented toward a common good. If we all agree that happiness is our aim, is our goal as a society, and that somehow, miraculously, we agreed on a definition of happiness, we can all converge and work together to reach out to this common good. However, among cons, we can count that in Aristotle's moral philosophy is grounded on the metaphysical assumption of a higher good, and I said that this might be one of Aristotle's philosophy most difficult aspect for him. He claims that there is something like good in itself, which in some treatises he calls God. Okay, so you see where the problem may begin. And secondly, they might run the risk, Aristotle's system may run the risk of fixing a definite set of value as universally valuable. As I just said, if we can reach an agreement of what is happiness and how to reach out to it, we could be tempted to fix this system, consider it as universally and eternally valuable and applicable, and that is not without any risk in moral philosophy and in everyday life. What about Nietzsche? In his view, evaluation is freed from moral judgment, which is kind of interesting because if I don't have any preconceived idea of what is good or bad, I can assess something, judge something, and avoid the label of this is good, this is bad, but rather look at why is that so? What is the will to power which supports this action, behavior, or value itself? And so I can avoid imposing a priori such or such ideas of what is good and bad. Nietzsche pays attention to what support and promote values, that's what I just said, and values are seen as fluid and as to be reinvented frequently. And that, I believe, it's very interesting. Let's think, for instance, if we think about Taekwondo as a martial art, as a sport, the way we teach it today and the way we try to promote it is certainly very different than the way 3 generations ago masters promoted it. For instance, let's think about a master who maybe knew the Korean War or the Vietnamese War. Their situation was different, therefore their values were different. And we cannot today, in peaceful Europe, sort of, despite recent events, in a peaceful Europe, we cannot teach Taekwondo as if we were at war. We are not training warriors, we are training athletes, right? We are training students, not soldiers. So it has to, our values have to be reinvented and rethink. However, in Nietzsche's view, there is an obvious risk of relativism, and needless to say that if I don't share someone's value, it might be risky to say, okay, you have your values, I have mine, let's not work together, let's not discuss with each other. It's your taste, it's mine. No, this might be kind of the lazy option, the lazy solution, not to discuss and just to admit. We can admit diversity, of course, but it doesn't mean that we have to just leave it that way and given up on any collective enterprises. And finally, so Nietzsche's philosophy may also open the way for the idea that might makes right. Right? I have said that in Nietzsche's perspective, all things are living force and force to power, will to power, and that a value is just the successful attempt of imposing one's value upon someone else. Therefore, if I'm stronger than you, I win, and you just have to follow my value. That's one of the risks, and that's not it's an unfortunate turn of event, but maybe you know that Nietzsche's texts have been used by Nazi Germany, and some of his texts have been recomposed by his sister, Elisabeth Nietzsche, to create the book which is called Will to Power, precisely, which is not one of Nietzsche's work. It is a recollection of Nietzsche's fragment after he died. Right? And this book has been highly influential in the formation of the Nazi ideology. So you can see here where does Nietzsche's philosophy might lead if it's not properly understood or if it is misused. So in a way of conclusion, I will first mention two important points that I highlight during this presentation, and then I will suggest maybe further an option for further consideration in our workshops. First, so value provide a scale and criteria by means of which evaluate, assess, judge the quality of actions, behavior, enterprises, intentions, and so on. I believe that's one of value's main value, actually, this idea that they can provide criteria for evaluation. Value do not stand by themselves, and that's maybe, philosophically speaking, an important discovery that I made working on this presentation. So value do not stand by themselves. As to their justification, they refer to something that makes them valuable. I mentioned in the definition, the operative definition of value, that value manifests something. They have something by which they are, they matter, they value. So they need to be, they call for some justification, and that was the question of grounding values and the question of how does this process of valorization can work? Where does value comes from? All right? So that's for the justification, but as for the subject, they apply to action and behavior. They are enacted in some way. A value which is not put it into practice somehow does not exist. If I say, oh, respect is such an important value, but I never show respectful behavior, so value does not exist. Respect does not exist as a value. It only exists as a word, all right? And that might be the same for any kind of value in Taekwondo. If I say it's so important to win, but I never win, where is that? How does that matter, right? So at the end of this presentation, at the end of this work in progress reflection in the context of this workshop, I would say that values are medium terms. They manifest and explicit their justification, what justifies them, and they ground the quality of the subject they apply to. So there is actually three terms we have to consider, values being the middle and some kind of the sort of courroie de transmission, between what justifies them and what enacts them. So, if I may offer a suggestion, the next step of a reflection of value could include further considerations on what justifies value in martial arts context. That is to say, further consideration on what makes value such as respect, modesty, patience, and so on, valuable, and justifies their status as the scale by which is measured what it means to be a good taekwondoist. In a previous reflection on the concept of value, I concluded my presentation by saying, what does justify value in a martial arts context? And I conclude with my student, it is authority. Authority as impersonate in the black belt, in the master. Black belt represent authority, and if the master says, you have to wear a clean dobok in my dojang, this is an important value of mine. And if you want to be a good taekwondoist, according to my perspective on what a good taekwondoist is, you have to present yourself with a clean dobok at the training, for instance. If I do not recognize the authority of the black belt suggesting or imposing this value, so the value is meaningless to me. All right? So it seems that values are not entirely arbitrary, but they rely on a kind of tour de force, grounded in the authority of the black belt. And in the philosophical tradition, tradition of political philosophy, there has been plenty of reflection on authority, but also the failure of authority. What do we do with value when what grounds and justifies them fails to be up to live or to show, to be an example for this value? What do we do? And I believe that's an important question if we come to reflect on the concept of authority in relation with value. That's about it for today. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you again for being here today.
If you have questions for Raphaël, don't hesitate. I think it's the first time in history we have spoken about Nietzsche in a sport.
No, that's not true, actually.
Yeah.
Because I think I already heard this reflection somewhere.
Okay.
Maybe it's you who told me that. But I do believe Nietzsche used to teach in modern Germany in gymnasium.
Okay.
And in gymnasium, it was both devoted to gymnastic, physical practice, physical training, and intellectual training.
Okay.
So gymnasium in Germany in modern Germany is this perfect institution of bringing together intellectual consideration and practice, physical practices.
We should not use because he's very fluent. And that would be to change our standard of evaluation pretty often.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that we change them haphazardly. If we have to change our standards, that's because somehow situations and the world, reality calls for it. And it doesn't mean either that we can do whatever we want. That would be a misinterpretation of Nietzsche's will to power. It is a risk, of course, and of course Nietzsche's philosophy has this merit to introduce fluidity in reasoning, but it doesn't mean fluidity, and to be open to change doesn't mean whatever change.
Finally, we end up to whatever, because if it's connected to the behavior, and somehow the situation changes, which means social practices changes, then it means that it will change the values. Because, as you said, as Aristotle said, values are directly connected to the behavior.
Yes.
You know, you cannot have values if you don't practice them, which we in sociology call social practice. And you did half of my job already.
Sorry.
Some of my PowerPoint presentation, but are directly connected to our practice. We can promote them in order to connect with the final objective of Anthony's project. But as long as we do not practice them, you know, we cannot talk about that. But if the practice have changed, which we could probably conclude that now the practice of the young generation had changed and that, then it would mean, according to Nietzsche, that we need to change the values. And it's not by the chance that Nietzsche is the postmodernist father. All other postmodernists today, they have basis on Nietzsche. After Nietzsche is Foucault and all the rest, which means fluidity in values. And then once you have that fluidity, then the values are not anymore objective.
But this is even more radical than that, actually, because the fluidity is not in values, it's in reality itself. Nietzsche is, in the Western tradition, one of the first philosophers to discharge the concept of substance and to disregard the idea of a fixed substance which constitutes being as being, right?
It's not by the chance that Nietzsche had the death of God expression. It's not that's not by the chance. I'm trying just to connect with Taekwondo, although it's as a conference, of course, it has this academic approach and we cannot avoid. That's why we are invited. However, we are trying to be practical and to use it in Taekwondo.
Exactly.
I would definitely not suggest to use Nietzsche as a basis for Taekwondo values if we want to keep these values. If we want to change the values in Taekwondo, we can say immediately, but Nietzsche says this, so we should change. You know, because reality is different.
Of course. But in the Nietzschean's view, it would be even more radical than that. It's not that we need to change, it will change. That's for a fact. Reality is nothing more than this process of change, so we cannot grasp and camp on our value eternally, because, and that's what he said, in the genealogy of morality, he said, Western tradition had camped on its value for too long, and now it's like if you keep a corpse and you keep it standing like it was alive, because, oh, this is a master, he's very important, he's dead, but I keep him in the dojang because he's important. No, it's a corpse, please get rid of that and bring something more useful than a corpse in the dojang. I'm being a bit provocative here, but
I don't know, should we keep on with this discussion or not?
We'll do that with a couple
During the break.
Sorry? Yeah, okay. No, I just wanted to see if we want to change the reality of the conversation.
I like it.
I agree that there is a danger in a Nietzschean perspective that if it will change, we should change it, and to change very quickly, pretexting the changeable, the fickle nature of reality. I would agree that that's...
However, last sentence, sorry. If we go with the evaluation of Aristotle and you, and that I will say as well, that the values are standard of evaluation, something, that will mean that we will need to change continuously our standards of evaluation. So once you have that you change the standard of evaluation, there is no more values. They are not, the values are standards. If we say every tournament now with Taekwondo, we're going to change the standard of who is winning, or from match to match, finally you will not have a clear criteria. The rules actually in Taekwondo...
It's a little bit different because it's rules, not values, and I believe...
Rules are based on standards, standards are based on values. The rules come up from your valuation, from bravery, from whatever, I will not go into it. But once you don't have the standards, which values are standards of evaluating something, and the rules, concretely, you win by points or by games, are some kind of criteria to know who won. Once we come to the Nietzsche concept of fluidity, because something has changed, because a simple thing, let's change the standard of winning, because not everybody can compete with, let's say, with Dutch or with Iranians. No, now we're going to go lower, because we cannot train like them. Or let's take, we cannot train with bears like Habib. We know that he trained with bears. Now that's lower. That would be, we will lower the standards. And that would understand, but the reality, no, you cannot keep that standard. Sorry?
There is two different but related problems. I would be happy to discuss that more with you and to go further in the discussion. But I see what you mean. I would not put values and rules exactly on the same level.
They're driven from each other. Okay, sorry.
Just to precise something, because you mentioned that in your dojang you don't have exactly the same values as the Taekwondo values. But in my opinion, when you have standards, you have the core values. You can't change that.
Yeah.
That's the base of Taekwondo. You can add other values, but you have to keep something that is a common value for everybody, not to change because you think that's the way. You have to keep it as a basis for everybody, for the community. So it means standard. Yeah. And then if you want to add something,
which will fit to the ones.
Exactly. So that's why you can change and can add something, but the core values have to be kept in the Taekwondo mindset and theory.
Once you apply Nietzsche, it would mean that each dojo can make all values of Taekwondo. Then there is no standard anymore. We are just discussing the two philosophical point because he brought them. So if you apply Nietzsche, that would mean every dojo could have own standards. And in Kosovo are less behind, in Sweden is more, and no, but here is Taekwondo, that's how I see Taekwondo. The others say, no, but in Japan is like this, Australia is like this. Because then it will not be a core standard or the core values that everybody must follow. If you have some particular values that you want to add, they need to be connected to the core ones. Otherwise, they will contradict.
Yes.
Once they contradict, there is no.
Yes, because when you pass the exam of the Kukiwon, for instance, then it's a common test, and you have the same program for everybody. So it means that you must follow the same rules. If you change, then it means that each country can add something, but you have to keep the basis. And in my opinion, that's the same with the values. You have to keep it as a basis.
I would agree. If you want to evaluate many different people and be fair with each one of them. But if I may come back to the definition I suggested, I say it's an operative definition. So if we want to contest it or challenge it, it's not a problem to me. I don't care for it more than to the extent of this presentation.
It's only to discuss about because it's really interesting.
I agree that values are manifestations. What about if what they manifest change? If what matters change? For today, so today we have certain goal. Kukiwon has a program of teaching and promoting Taekwondo and to make it accessible to many people, to make it democratic if we want, not to be elitist, for instance, by offering lessons for a fair price, by promoting federation and helping them build up a program which will develop and so on and so on. What is it that matters there? That's a question. I don't have any answer. What is it that matters in the Kukiwon? Because you mentioned Kukiwon and the test, the common test for higher grades, which is a very interesting comment. So, what is it that matters for Kukiwon in their promotion of Taekwondo? And that's a question. And maybe the Nietzschean perspective would not be just, oh, we have to change value. No, we have to see what underlie them, what supports them. So we have to look for what matters, not for values themselves, because values manifest something. And as far as they manifest something stable, unchanging, that's one thing. Okay, we can keep those values and enlarge the system and make it more consistent by adding some more particular values and so on. That's not a problem, and we can decide about rules and standards. But what if tomorrow the standard, what is important is not to promote Taekwondo as open to everybody's practices which contribute to the development of a more fairest world, or to promote sport as an Olympic and so on, but simply to generate money through a competition, and that winner will win big monies. What if what matters suddenly is not practice itself, but it's market, it's merchandising? What if what is important change? What do you do with values?
That's exactly where values are tested. That's exactly when you decide, do you have value or not? If you say, I'm respectful, and in the moment you have the situation to test yourself, are you respectful toward the elderly, let's say, or the black belt or third belt, and you don't show respect, that's where everybody is tested in real life, in every kind of situation, if you promote kind of value. So if they are not manifested, it means the value were not executed.
Yes.
So the social practice of it, or Aristotle...
Because we agree that respect is something important, but it would not be too counterfactual to imagine a society where respect is not a core, is not of first importance.
Okay, I will... But as
it might be difficult
if
for
we
us,
had the black belt exam, then the values of Taekwondo would be wherever you do that black belt, either Korea, in here, or in Sweden, or in Creta, then everybody should say, this guy is black belt.
Yeah.
If we say, no, it's black belt in Kosovo, but it's not in Sweden, there is a second dan, but in Dutch is maybe red, then we have troubles to identify what are the values. In the most understandable way is in traffic. You know, traffic communication, how we communicate, because we have the same practice, apart from England, of course, that we need to go on the right side, where the practice of communicating is exactly based on what we see. 60, you drive 60, you drive 70, and there are standards for that region. So the manifestation of what we see, and to change the value based on manifestation, in this case, if I understood you well, would be if you see 60 and I drive 120, okay, let's put 120 there.
No. So there, I think, because what I say in my definition is that values are themselves the manifestation. The point is not to change value according to the manifestation, but to manifest what matters differently. Manifest it differently would mean to change, to have other values.
Once you change manifestation, you change the values.
Yes, because values are the manifestation, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. I enjoy to talk to you, but let's bring it.
So, friends, we take a 10 minutes break, and we will listen our two last lecture for the afternoon. Our friend from Kosovo and Thomas. Thank you.